My grandfather did not ask himself if he was ready for family. He built one because that is what you did, because that is what humans do. My generation asks the question, runs the numbers, waits for the right time, and the right time keeps getting pushed back by a system that is not designed for the life we are actually built to live. This episode is about what that cost us, not in dollars and everything else. This is moral economy. We live in time where people are working harder than ever and falling further behind, where families feel more pressure even when they are doing more right, where the gap between the effort and outcome has never been wider and nobody explains why. This podcast exists to close that gap, to take the intersection of money, family, and values and talk about it like adults, not with a political spin, not with the financial jargon designed to make you feel small. Just clear thinking from someone who has lived the pressure, done the work, and refused to pretend the system is the same as it was. Because economics is not just the numbers on a government report. It is a dinner table argument you did not want to have. It is a 2 in the morning moment when you look at the ceiling and wonder if you made the right choices. It is the exhaustion that has nothing to do with laziness. This is Moral Economy Talk, and I'm your host, Aleksandar Balta. Let's get into it. Last week, we spent an hour on math, housing ratio that went from 3 times income to 20 times in single generation. The grocery cart that cost 8% more than it did 4 years ago. The $48,000 in debt that I carried personally, and what 18 months of 5 jobs and 2 a.m. silence actually cost the family. We measured rent in hours of your life and named the mechanisms underneath the pressure most working people feel every day but cannot fully articulate. Today, I want to follow that thread somewhere harder because the math is the surface. What the math does underneath to the way we live, the way we love, what we believe about ourselves and our future, that is the deeper damage. And it is a damage that almost nobody's talking about directly. So let me say my thesis for this episode clearly at the start so you know where we are going. We are drifting away from the life human beings are built for. Not because we stop wanting it, not because values change, but because the economic system we are living inside has made it harder and harder to access the things that actually make human lives work. Committed partnership, children, community, the sense that you are building something that will outlast you. And here's what makes this different from a political argument or religious argument. This is not about ideology. This is about the longest happiness study in the human history found. This is about what happens to a person's body and mind when they cannot build the life they are wired for. This is about the specific grief that does not get named because the culture has not decided yet whether it is allowed to exist. I grew up watching my father build a life the traditional way: work hard, marry young, have children, root yourself in community. He did not philosophize about it. He did not run a cost benefit analysis. He came from Yugoslavia with nothing, and he did what humans have done across every culture and every century of recorded history. He built a family and he invested everything in it. My grandfather did the same. His grandfather did the same. Every generation before mine, going back further than any of them could name, organized their lives around the same basic architecture: partnership, children, community, and building something that outlasts them. That architecture was not invented by any religion or any political system. It predates all of them. It is architectural of human life itself. And something has happened to that architecture in our generation. Not because we stopped wanting it. Every piece of data I can find says we still want it. The Gallup survey says we want 2.7 children on average. The marriage research says we want committed partnership. The Harvard happiness data says that people at the end of their lives who are most fulfilled are the ones who invested most deeply in their relationships. The desire has not changed. What has changed is economic and cultural environment that used to make acting on that desire possible. And I will tell you something honest. In the years when I was working 5 jobs and carrying $48,000 in debt, and my wife was sitting in the dark kitchen at 2 a.m. waiting for me to come home, I was not thinking about macroeconomic theory. I was thinking about the life I wanted to give her, the family I wanted to build, the thing I wanted to become. The pressure was not just financial. It was the pressure of human being trying to become what has meant to become and being blocked at every turn by a math that was working against him. That experience, the gap between what you are built for and what the system allows you to access, is what this episode is about. Let's start with the most important piece of research I have ever come across. And I promise it is not what you expected. In 1938, Harvard University started the longest scientific study of human happiness ever conducted. They tracked the same people, eventually over 2,000 of them across 3 generations, to their entire adult lives. Medical exams, brain scans, blood tests, interviews with family members. They followed them through war, through poverty, through wealth, through divorce, through loss, through old age, for 85 years. You know what they found? After 85 years, thousands of participants and more data than any other happiness study in history. The answer was not money. It was not status. It was not career achievement. It was not even health. It was relationships. Specifically, the quality of your close relationship is the single strongest predictor of a long, happy, healthy life. This is not my opinion. This is 85 years of Harvard research. The study's current director, Dr. Robert Waldinger, put it simply: good relationships keep us healthier and happier. Period. And he said something else that stopped me when I read it. He said, loneliness kills. It is as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. Think about that for a moment. The physical health cost of being isolated and disconnected is comparable to a pack-a-day smoking habit. We spend enormous social energy trying to get people to stop smoking. We spend almost none acknowledging the isolation is doing the same damage. Now, here's where it connects directly to what is happening in our economy, because the same Gallup organization that tracks economic data also ran the largest study on marriage and happiness ever conducted. 2.6 million adults surveyed from 2009 to 2023, 15 years of data. What did they find? Married people are consistently 17 to 24 percentage points more likely to be thriving in their well being than unmarried adults. Not marginally, more likely, significantly. And if finding held regardless of race, age, gender, or education level. Here is the single most striking data point from that study. A married person who did not finish high school evaluates their life more favorable on average than an unmarried person with a graduate degree. Let me say that again because I think it deserves to sit for a moment. Married person without the high school diploma is more likely to be thriving than an unmarried person with a postgraduate education. Marriage is a stronger predictor of human well-being than education. According to Gallup, it is stronger than race, age, gender, and education combined. Now, I want to be honest about one nuisance here because the researcher earns honesty. An unhappy marriage is not better than being single. The studies are careful about this. What they are measuring is healthy, committed partnership, not the performance of marriage or the legal status of it. The institution matters less than quality of what it contains. What the research is telling us is that a deep, committed, lasting partnership, the thing marriage is supposed to represent, is one of the most powerful drivers of human flourishing we have ever measured. And that matters to this show because the system we described in episode 2, the broken housing math, the wage gap, the debt that follows people from their first adult year, is directly attacking the conditions under which that partnership can come form and sustain itself. I have a friend, a man I have known since my early 30s, sharp, hardworking, the kind of person who reads and thinks and takes his life seriously. He has been in 3 relationships in the past decade that all ended for variations of same reasons. He was not in a financial position where he felt that he could ask a woman to build a life with him. The apartment was too small. The savings were too thin. The stability was not there. And so he waited and is still waiting. And he will tell you honestly in the quiet moments when the performance drops that it is the sharpest loneliness he has ever felt. This is not a weakness story. This is a system story. A man who is built for partnership, kept from it by a man. And the cost he pays for this is not just emotional. According to 85 years of Harvard research, it is also physical. It shortens his life. I want to make an argument that you will not hear on most podcasts, and definitely not on mainstream media, because the cultural conversation around children has become so cautious and so careful about not seeming to judge anyone's choices that it has stopped being honest about something important. Having children is not a lifestyle choice. It is a human nature. I want to be precise about what I mean by that. I'm not saying that people who do not have children cannot live a meaningful life and fulfilled lives. They can. I'm not making a judgment about individual circumstances, health, or personal situations. What I'm saying is this: across every human culture, across every century of recorded history, across every continent, every religious tradition, and every political system that has ever existed, Human beings have organized their lives around family formation, around the bearing and raising of children. This is not a coincidence. This is not a cultural preference that happened to be popular for a few thousand years and is now being improved upon. This is what we are built for at the deepest biological and psychological level. The research on meaning and purpose is clear about this. Having children is not strongly linked to moment happiness. Now, I will be honest about that because the data is honest about it. Parenting is hard. It is expensive. It is exhausting. The day to day experience of raising young children produces the kind of hedonic happiness the surveys capture. This is a different kind of well being. Researchers call it eudaimonic well being, the sense of living a life worth living. Parenting is one of its strongest sources for both men and women. The distinction between happiness and meaning is one of the most important things I can tell you in this episode. Short term happiness is the feeling you get from a good meal, a vacation, a quiet afternoon. Meaning is the thing that makes you able to get through a hard year because you know what you are doing it for. Children provide meaning in a way that almost nothing else in human life matches. And meaning is what sustains a person through a difficulty. It is what makes the 2 a.m. moments survive. Now, here's the part that breaks my heart when I look at data clearly. Statistics Canada confirm Canada's fertility rate in 2023 at 1.26 children per woman, the lowest ever recorded. The United States sits at 1.62. Both countries are far below the 2.1 replacement rate needed to maintain the population. And Gallup data I mentioned earlier tells us that Americans want 2.7 children on average. Gallup's own analysis says that the gap over a full child per family between what people want and what they are having is driven primarily by practical challenges, not by changing desires. People aren't choosing not to have children. They are being priced out of having children. Statistics Canada estimates the cost of raising one child from birth to age 18 in Canada at approximately $293,000 in the current dollars. In the United States, the USDA base figures is $233,000, which the Brookings Institution just to over $310,000 in the current dollars. And those numbers do not include post-secondary education. Expensive years of raising a young child coincides exactly with the years when a young parent are also trying to buy a first home, pay off a student debt, and establish themselves professionally. Those costs do not arrive one at a time. They arrive simultaneously. I know a woman, late 30s, married to a good man, both of them working full-time in professional jobs. They have one child, and they want three. They've had the conversation probably 50 times. The math never works. The childcare for one child already consumes nearly entirety of one salary. According second means one parent stops working, which means the mortgage becomes impossible, which means they either move away from city where their jobs and their community and their support systems are, or they stay and they live in financial pressure that both of them know their marriage cannot absorb indefinitely. She told me something in the conversation I will not forget. She said, I feel like I'm grieving a family I never got to have, while the family I do have is right in front of me. I did not know what to do with that. I did not have an answer for her. But I want to name what she described publicly because I think millions of people are carrying exactly that grief, and the culture has not decided yet whether they are allowed to say it out loud. Child free But financial necessity is not the same as child free by choice. Both look identical in the statistics, they do not feel identical. And the silence around the difference is one of the cruelest things this economic moment is doing to people. There is also a socialized consequence that goes beyond the individual family. A country that is not reproducing itself is a country in slow structural transformation. The workforce shrinks relatively to retired population. The tax base narrows. The social programs built for a different demographic reality face an increasing pressure. These are not abstract projections. They are the documented trajectory of every developed country that has fallen and stayed below replacement rate. And the response cannot be tell people to have more children while doing nothing about the math that makes having children impossible. You cannot will your way out of an economic reality with the moral instruction. I want to have a conversation that most podcasters either will not touch or handle so badly that they drive away half of their potential audience before the third minute. I want to talk about feminism, women, work, family, and what economic shift of the past 50 years actually did that to all of it. And I want to do it without anger, without blame, and without pretending that the honest version of this conversation is simple. Because it is not simple. And people who make it simple, either by dismissing the entire conversation as an anti women or by reducing it to culture war grievance, are not helping anyone understand what actually happened. Let me start with what I think is the most honest framing I can offer. There are two distinct things that have been called feminism over the past 50 years, and conflating them produces an enormous confusion. The first is economic feminism. Women needing to enter the workforce in large numbers because one income stopped being enough. In 1970, about 40% of married women in North America were in the paid workforce. Today, the number is above 70%. And here's the question you almost never hear asked. Why? Not why in the sense of women aspirations and capabilities. Those are real and I'm not minimizing them. Why in the sense of what changed economically that made a single income household unworkable for the average family? The answer goes back to episode 2. The inflation that quietly eroded purchasing power over 50 years. The housing costs that went from 3 times income to 10 times and beyond. The real cost of living that outpaces wages in every category that matters: housing, childcare, healthcare, education. The single income stopped being enough not because of any policy discussion about gender. It stopped being enough because the math was deliberately or at minimum neglected, allowed to break or negligently. So what happened? The economy needed two incomes to produce the stability used to produce with one. And women who had been building education credentials and professional ambitions throughout the post-war decades entered the workforce. And that was in many ways a genuine expansion of human possibility. More talent applied to more problems, more perspectives in more rooms, more economic agency for more people. But here's the thing that nobody says clearly. When both parents have to work full time just to cover the basics, that is not liberation. This is economy extracting two incomes from a household that used to survive on one. The standard of living did not double when women entered the workforce en masse, what happened over time was that the two incomes became the new baseline. Housing prices absorbed the additional household income. Childcare became an industry that captured a significant portion of the second salary. The system recalibrated around the new normal. And now we are at the point where two incomes are required to do what one used to do. And many families cannot even manage that math. Elizabeth Warren, before she was senator, when she was a Harvard Law School professor researching bankruptcy law and consumer finance, wrote a book called The Two Income Trap. Her argument was specific and documented. When women entered the workforce and household incomes rose, the cost of the things families most needed, particularly housing in a good school districts, rose to absorb that income. Families did not end up richer. They ended up with both parents working at the same or less margin than before, but now with no backup. When one income was enough and one partner was not working, you had a financial reserve, a crisis fund in human form. When both incomes are required just to maintain the baseline, a single job loss or medical event or family crisis removes your entire margin immediately. That is economic feminism. That is a system failure that affected everyone: men, women, families, children. And it was produced by the same broken math we talked about in episode 2. The second thing, called feminism, is ideological. The cultural messaging, and it became very loud in 1990s and 2000s, has only intensified since that careers, identity, and family is optional. The marriage is a patriarchy institution that constrains women. The decision to stay home with the children is a step backwards. That ambition should always be directed outward, towards professional achievement, towards independence, towards the kind of self actualization that does not require commitment to another person or family. And here's where I want to be careful, because I am not saying the messaging is entirely wrong for every woman, or that it was malicious in its intent. I'm saying that it produced a specific outcome that is now showing up in the data, and the outcome involves a real human suffering that the original messaging did not anticipate and did not currently honest about. A significant number of women absorbed that message, prioritized career and independence through their 20s and early 30s, and discovered in the mid to late 30s that the biological window for having children did not negotiate with the current narratives. They arrived at a point where they wanted what the message told them to defer: family, partnership, children, and found that deferring it had caused the message never warned them about. I have this conversation with women, not in the abstract, with real people. A colleague who built an impressive professional career and is now 42, single, and grieving the children she does not have, with the honesty she can only manage with people she trusts completely. She's not a cautionary tale. She's a fully realized human being who made reasonable decision inside the messages her culture gave her, and she's now paying a price that her culture is not yet honest about. I want to say something to the man listening right now, because I think this is important, and I want to be clear about my position. What I just described is not argument for going back to a world where women had no professional options. That world was worse. It is not an argument that women should not work or have careers. It is an argument that the cultural messaging we give an entire generation of women and men about what a life is supposed to look like was incomplete at the best and dishonest at worst. It did not account for human nature. It did not account for biology. It did not account for the fact that the things that longest happiness study in history says actually matter: committed relationship, deep connection, family, where being acted, devalued in the name of progress that turned out to be the more complicated than the original pitch. Both the economic pressure and ideological confusion pushed in the same direction: away from family formation, away from early marriage, away from children, and toward the life organized around individual achievement, professional identity, and the performance of independence. The system benefited enormously from all of it. Two incomes are more taxable than one. More people working means more spending, more debt, more economic activity. A culture of individuals is more profitable than a culture of families. And the cost of that argument is paid not on any corporate balance sheet, but in specific human grief. We have been talking about it for the last half hour. I want to name something now that I think is underneath all of the statistics and all of the economic arguments and all of the cultural analysis. Something that I believe is the deepest explanation for anxiety, the emptiness, the restlessness, and defines so much of what I see in people my age and younger. When you cannot live the life you're built for, something in you knows it, not as an articulate thought, not as a statement you would make to a therapist, as a low level persistent signal that something is missing. That the way your days are structured does not match the way your life was supposed to feel. That the achievements you were told to pursue have not produced the thing you were promised they would produce. I think about a man I worked with in the trades, 41 years old, excellent at his work, earns a decent wage. He's in an apartment he rents alone in a city that costs too much. He has had relationships, but none that he could figure out how to make permanent, giving his housing situation, giving his debt load, given the fact that asking a woman to build life in a bedroom rental with no clear path to anything else felt like asking her to sign on to something that he could not honestly promise would improve. He does not describe himself as depressed. He describes himself as fine. And when I spend time with him, I believe him. He's functional. He's capable. He's generally fine, and in all the ways system measures fine. But there is something in him. I have I have seen it come out in right conversation, usually late at night, usually after he has had a couple drinks, and the performance of fine has relaxed a little. That is grieving. Grieving the wife he does not have, the kids he did not have, the house he did not build, the life that was supposed to follow from work he has been putting in for 20 years. That grief has no official category, does not show up in the diagnostic scale. It is not diagnosable conditional. It is just the specific experience of human being living in a world that has made the life he is built for economically inaccessible. And I want to say something about that the mainstream conversation around the mental health almost never says. And a significant portion of what we are calling anxiety, what we are calling depression, what we are calling the mental health crisis of this generation, it's a rational response to an irrational situation. You are not broken because you feel this way. You are human, and humans are not designed to live in the kind of isolation, the kind of delayed adulthood, the kind of perpetually deferred family formation that the current economic system produces. The research on isolation health is ambiguous. Weldinger at Harvard says loneliness kills as powerful as smoking. Analysis of 148 studies on social isolation found that people with adequate social relationships have 50% greater likelihood of survival compared to those with poor isolation social connections. 50%. We have entire public health system with conditions that carry a fraction of that risk. Isolation carries a risk compared to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and we treat it as a personal reference. When the economic system makes it harder to form lasting partnerships, harder to have children, harder to build the kind of rooted, committed community life that human beings have organized around for all of recorded history. It is not just creating a social problem, it is creating a health crisis, a meaning crisis, a crisis of purpose that no meditation app or therapy session can solve at the root, because the root is not the individual, the root is in the conditions. I want to tell you about the moment a close friend described to me. He has a daughter. She was maybe 3 years old at the time. He had come home from a long day, not a bad day, just long. And she was sitting at a kitchen table drawing something. She looked up when he walked in and held up the picture. It was not identifiable as anything, it's just colors and lines the way 3-year-old draws. But the look on her face when she held up was the look of someone who had made something and wanted the person they loved the most to see it. He sat down next to her. He told me later, and in one of those honest conversations you only have with someone you actually trust, that he started crying on the drive home from visiting me that same week, not because he was sad, because he realized in that moment exactly what he was working towards and exactly what the financial pressure was putting at risk. Not his retirement account, not his career. That moment, the ability to be present and unhurried and fully there for a child who loves you without reservation, in a home you can afford, with enough margin in your life that you are actually there, not just physically present while mentally calculating. He looked at me and said, I'm not working to afford a house. I'm working to afford that moment. And the system keeps making it more expensive. That is, the system is not attacking your financial well being, it is attacking your ability to be fully present in the life you are meant to live. And that is a moral emergency. I want to speak directly to men for a moment, because there is a specific version of this drift happening to men right now that is not being talked about honestly in most places. A traditional framework of masculine purpose in every culture that has ever existed was built around provisions of protection. We are men. You build something. You protect people who depend on you. You have a stake in the world that allows you. The framework is not a social construct invented to oppress people. It is what human males have organized their purpose around for as long as there has been a human males. And when the economic conditions make it genuinely difficult to fulfill that purpose, when men cannot provide a stability he believes he owes the people he loves, it does not just frustrates him, it hollows him out. I felt this during the debt years, not the stress of debt itself, the shame underneath the stress, the specific feeling that I was not becoming what I was supposed to become. That the person who showed up at that kitchen at 2 a.m. was a diminishing version of the man she deserved to have there. You can work 20 hours a day and still feel like you're falling or what you're working towards keeps receding. The feeling that you are failing as a provider, as a builder, as a person who stakes in the world, that is not a personality problem. This is what happens when the system blocks the path to what you are built to do. The cultural response to that feeling has been inadequate. Telling men the masculine purpose is a toxic construct that does not help a man who is generally trying to build something for the people he loves. It adds ideological confusion on top of economic pressure. The honest response is to name what the system is doing and build the most complete version of your purpose inside the constraints you actually have. Presence when you're at home, full investment in your relationship and your children, even when the financial noise is the loudest. Understanding that provision is not only financial, it is showing up as a person your family needs you to be. The economic pressure does not just limit what you can build, it changes how you see yourself while you are at failing to build it. And the mechanism that makes that worse than it would otherwise be is a social media. The old phrase was keeping up with Joneses. The Joneses used to be a local, your actual neighbor. The people at work, the family down the street, whose kitchen you could see from yours. The comparison was bounded by geography. You could only be measured against what you could actually see. Social media removed that boundary entirely. You're now exposed daily to the curated best moments of millions of people, the vacation homes, the business launches, the engagement announcements, the new homes, the family photos that are lit and filtered and selected to represent a life at its most appealing. And you're comparing all of that to unfiltered reality of your own life. Your Tuesday, your rent notice, your kitchen argument about money that is really an argument about the fear. Landmark 2018 study, the first to establish causal link rather than just a correlation, found that limiting social media to 30 minutes a day produced significant reductions in depression and loneliness within the 3 weeks. 3 weeks from one behavioral change. That tells you how much of what people are experiencing as depression and disconnection is being actively manufactured by comparison architecture of these platforms. But here's the deeper identity problem underneath the comparison. When traditional milestones of adulthood, your own home, marriage, children, roots in the community, become economically inaccessible, people do not just lose the milestones, they lose the identity that milestones was supposed to build. A human need for identity does not wait potentially while you save towards down payment. It searches for substitutes, and people substitute consumption. You cannot buy the house, but you can build identity around having taste and style. You cannot afford a family, but you can build identity around a travel, a fitness, or a personal brand. None of these are inherently wrong, but they are thin. They are not built to carry the full weight of human identity. And at the same point, in the quiet moments, they reveal themselves as thin. Some people substitute tribal identity, political, ideological. When personal milestones are out of reach, group identity fills a psychological space. You know who you are because of who you oppose. This is a part, not all, but part of why the political polarization of our moment is so intense. People whose identity architecture is an stable anchor more heavily into group identity, and a group identity sharpens its edges through opposition. The frustration that the system generates has to go somewhere. And if system is too abstract to be angry at, it finds something more visible, more human, more immediate. And then there is a quieter identity problem that does not look like political anger at all. It looks like a drift, a person in their late 20s or early 30s who has a job and phone and access to more entertainment and stimulation than any human being in history, and who sits with a specific low level feeling at the end of the Sunday that they cannot fully name. Not sadness, not depression, just the sense that the week coming is going to be the same as the week that just passed. That nothing is being built, that they are moving through time without leaving any mark on it. I think that feeling is what feels like to be a human being who is not living towards anything that requires them to give everything they have. Marriage requires everything you have. Children require everything you have. Community requires you to show up even when you do not feel like it. Those commitments are demanding because they are supposed to be demanding. Demanding nature of them is what produces the depth that makes them meaningful. A life organized entirely around personal comfort and individual preference is not a free life. It is shallow. And the drift feeling, the Sunday evening emptiness, is the soul's honest report on the situation. I'm not romanticizing difficulty. I'm saying that research on a meaning is consistent across decades and cultures. The things that produce the deepest sense of life well lived are the things that are required the most of you. The relationship you worked at, the children you raised, the community you showed up for even when it was inconvenient, the difficult thing you did not give up on. Those are the things people are at the end of their lives point to, not the years they optimized for comfort, not the period when they had the most freedom and fewest obligations, the years when they gave themselves fully to something that needed them. I want to end this episode with something I feel strongly about, because this is not a show that diagnosis without direction. And direction I want to give you today is not a financial tip or productivity hack. It is a values argument. Given everything we have talked about, the economic pressure, working against family formation, the cultural messaging that confused a generation about what actually matters, the math that keeps moving the finish line. I want to make the affirmative case that it is still worth building the life you are built for. not despite the difficulty, because what the difficulty is protecting. The 85-year-old Harvard study did not find the people with the easiest lives were the happiest. It found the people with the deepest relationships were the healthiest and the most fulfilled, regardless of what those relationships caused them. What the Harvard study found consistently over 85 years is that the people at the end of their lives who were most fulfilled were the ones who had invested most in their relationships. Not their careers, not their finances, their relationships. Waldinger has said in an interview that the most common regret he hears from participants looking back is not that they worked too hard, it is that they did not invest enough in the people around. Do not let the math convince you to defer the thing that the longest happiness study in history says matters most. Find a way to build it inside the math you actually have, not the math you are waiting for, because the math you're waiting for may never arrive. And the life you are built for is not a reward for financial readiness. It is the thing that makes the difficulty of the financial pressure worth enduring. Here are three things that are within your control right now. Stop measuring your readiness by old standard. The cultural script you were given was written for a different economy. You will never feel ready by that standard. Define readiness by your actual values and your actual circumstances, not by a housing market designed to be perpetually out of reach. Invest in your relationship as deliberately as you invest in anything else. The research is ambiguous. The quality of your close relationships is the strongest predictor of everything else you care about: your health, your happiness, your sense of meaning, your resilience under the pressure. Most people spend more time managing their finances and then they do consciously investing in the most important asset in their life. The math is backwards. Talk to your partner honestly about what you both actually want, not what is currently possible, what you want. Because the conversation about what you want has to come before the plan for how to get there. And a plan for how to get there cannot be built while pretending the want does not exist. The system is working against the life you are built for. That the honest truth, but the system does not get to define what your life means. That is still yours. And the people across every culture and every century who build families under worse conditions than ours, who built them during the wars, during famines, during genuine deprivation that makes our economic pressure look manageable. They did not wait for the math to work. They built the life anyway. And then they made the math work around it. This is not instruction to be financially reckless. Not that. It's an instruction to be honest about your priorities. The house is a means to the life. It is not the life. Do not let the means become the whole purpose. I want to close this section with something that I think deserves to be said directly. The values underneath the traditional family: commitment, sacrifice, presence, building something that outlasts you. Those values did not become obsolete when economy changed. They became more important because when the external structures stopped reliably delivering the life they promised, the eternal values are the only reliable foundation left. The house can be taken, the savings can be eroded, the market can move against you. What cannot be taken is the quality of the person you have become in your relationships, the depth of what you built with the people you committed to, and legacy, how you showed up for the people who needed you. My father built a life with far less than most of us are working with. What he built cannot be measured in the square footage or net worth. What he built is the man I am trying to be, the husband, the father, the person who showed up. That is the inheritance that matters. And it is available to anyone who decides that building is priority, not when the math is perfect. Now, with what you have in the life you are actually living. One thing to carry from today: you are not behind, you are not broken, you are not failing the life you are supposed to build. You're a human being living inside economic system that is making it harder than it should be to access the things that human beings are actually built for. Understanding that it is not an excuse, it is accurate, and it changes what you do with the difficulty. Marriage is not a social convention from a previous era. It is one of the strongest predictors of human flourishing ever measured. Children are not a lifestyle preference. They are one of the deepest sources of meaning available to human life. Community is not optional. Isolation kills. That is not a metaphor. It is Harvard research. The system is working against all of it. That makes the fight to build it anyway more important, not less. If this episode clarified something you have been carrying without a name, share with someone who is carrying the same thing. Not for the show, because the silence around this part of what makes it so heavy. Episode 4: Who really decides the rules? That episode will change how you read the news for the rest of your life. Subscribe to Moral Economy Talk so you don't miss it. Because money shapes how we live, but values decide who we become. This is Moral Economy Talk. I'm your host, Aleksandar Balta, and I will see you in the next episode.